In this part of the course, we're going to start looking at how to move geometry and data between the different systems of Revit and Rhino. We're going to start by looking at how we can start moving 3D geometry from Revit into Rhino to create a basis of modeling in Rhino. In our Rhino setup, we have a map file, property line, a building outline, but we don't really have a lot of other things in the 3D space, flat map data. So when we start modeling, maybe in Revit, maybe in Rhino, we want to start making the geometry that we're modeling available in the different systems, and we will try to avoid creating duplicate geometry. So let's do that. Let's start by modeling some things in Revit, like we already did. We have four walls inside our Revit space. I'm going to be using the 3D view to export the walls and the other elements that we're modeling in Revit to Rhino using DWG. The first thing I always do is I create a view by right-clicking on the current view or the 3D view and duplicating it. I'm going to prepare a view that's going to be my DWG export view. It's going to be my 3D DWG export view because I'll use other views to export 2D data like annotations, grids, level elements. Elements that are not available in 3D view, you need 2D views like sections, elevations, and plans to export. So let's start by seeing how we can get this guy into Rhino. I'm going to open the File tab, go Export, CAD formats where you can export to SAT, DGN, DXF, and DWG. I normally use the DWG file. I don't believe Rhino can import SAT files, but that's going to be the file format or one of the file formats we're going to be using the other way. DWG, say no thanks to the save setting. Inside the DWG export settings dialog in Revit, you're going to first off choose which views or sheets you want to export. When you have set up a 3D view that's prepared and specifically assigned for exporting 3D DWG files, you're just going to keep this at current view only. You'll open the 3D view and then using that view as a basis for export. You can also, if you want to, prepare a set of 2D and 3D views for exporting to DWG, although I would mention that you can only use one setup. That's the dialog box, the pull-down menu on the top left corner. You can only use one setup per export. So if you need different kinds of setups for different kinds of views, that maybe doesn't make much sense. But for instance, you can make one setup for 3D files and one setup for 2D files and then just create different sets of views for those exports. Let's just try exporting this file without looking into the setup. We go next. We're going to save this file in the same setup folder because this is basically part of the setup exercise. I'm going to choose automatic short just to get the default naming of the Revit file, of the DWG file. That's going to make it a little bit easier for us to just overwrite this later. I am exporting that file, and in the Rhino environment, I'm not going to close or save, Control S, the setup DWG file, 3DM file. I'll move to the setup folder and I'll drag the 3D DWG export into the Rhino canvas and then choosing Open. I can open DWG files in Rhino. Oh, there's an error. Let's look at this. So the reason why this is happening in Rhino 5, I have not checked this in Rhino 6, but Rhino 5 cannot import DWG files that have been saved in the 18 version of DWG. So we're going to go into the Modify Export Setup settings and then create a new setup that we just temporarily call Rhino export. We're going to go over to the General tab and just set the default file format of DWG to 13. Click OK, next, and then overwrite the previous DWG file. Let's go back to the Rhino file, open the File Explorer, and drag the DWG file into Rhino with the Open File option on. Click No Thank You to the question about saving, and we expand Perspective View, right-click, click on Shaded, and you will see the geometry coming from Revit. They get assigned to layers. We're going to look into that later. But you will notice immediately that there's something funky about this geometry. Let's click on it and check out the properties. Oh, it's open mesh. Everything here is mesh geometry. Now that may sometimes be a good thing, but in our case that's rarely a good thing, especially when it comes to moving geometry between the programs. You can use mesh, for instance, to create topography in Revit, but not a lot of other things. Let's also check the distance. We're going to turn on Object Snap. Oops, apparently I wasn't able to do that. And then just check a distance here. Wow, 23,365 meters. There's more things that's funky about this file than the mesh. We're going to go back and look at the settings one more time. File, Export, CAD Formats, DWG. Into our Rhino export setup. Let's just keep the layer settings as they are for now. We're going to move on to the Solids tab, where I see that the settings are set to Polymesh. This is actually a default setting in Revit, so you may want to make sure that this is set to ACIS Solids, which is going to turn any geometry, 3D geometry in Revit into BREPs in Rhino. Let's also move over to the units and coordinates. Even though I set my project units in Revit to meters, the export settings of a Revit file by default is set to millimeters. So I'm going to set this to meter and then also just keep project internal as a coordinate system basis, even though our survey point is located in the same place. If the survey point moves and you choose shared coordinate system basis, that survey point is going to be the origin of your exported data, along actually also with the orientation. So if I now choose shared, it's going to export this DWG file using the true north orientation and not the project north, which is what I want. Also moving back to the general tab of the export setting, I'm going to disable the export views on sheets as links as external references, just because I want to. Alright, click OK, next, OK, save over the previous DWG file, open Rhino, open the setup folder. We're going to drag this into our Rhino and click open, no save, voila. And we have a much better setup, I believe. The entire wall is a closed poly surface in Rhino, which is a good thing. And the units, if I check them, by doing a distance and then measuring the height of this to 3.5 meters. Perfect. Now we are good to go. The last thing that I want to do before continuing this process is a personal preference. This is something you don't have to do. It's a personal preference. Starting off from Revit and learning Rhino, it became more useful for me to keep working with the Revit categories and subcategories and not layers. The custom layers that are in Rhino is sometimes really nice, but sometimes a pain in the something. So I usually prefer to go back to the Revit setting and then export CAD formats DWG. I'm going to go into the layer settings and go all the way down to the walls category of elements. And then instead of using these American Institute of Architects standards or Singapore standard or whatever, I'm going to use the HOVA standard, which is the same as a category. So I'm going to say that the walls in Revit are going to be walls in Rhino. I'm going also to remove the color setting, the color override of these different subcategories, and also the interior, foundation, and retaining setting. Okay, regarding the subcategories, if I just select all the subcategories and click one of them and click enter, they will all get left blank. I can do the same thing with interior, exterior, foundation, retaining, which is the wall functions. So I'm selecting these using the shift key on my keyboard, selecting one of these layer settings, using the backspace on my keyboard, and then enter. It's going to remove all of them. I can do the same thing actually with these, and then just instead of removing it, I can click or write or type walls, enter. That's going to put the layer walls on all my walls, regardless of their function or subcategory. So if I click OK now and back into the layer settings, let's try to find the wall settings, you will see that, because I removed all the subcategories for layer overrides, they're all going to inherit the layer naming of the main category. Walls, walls, walls interior, walls, and so on. So now, if I go save, next, OK, overwrite, and I go back into my Rhino setup, open the setup folder, drag the 3D DWG file onto my Rhino canvas as before, click open, no thank you to save, open the perspective view, set shaded. You will see now that I have the walls layer. I turn it off and all my walls disappear. You can also set the display color to something else than red by setting it by layer, for instance. Then you can choose to control the geometry or the color of the elements inside Rhino by layer. But this is an attribute or a property, I think, that's going to be disappearing once you export some updated geometry from Rhino. So this whole setup is created to make an efficient workflow between the systems. It's not a perfect one, but it's quite efficient. So next up, I'm going to purge this file. Click purge or type purge and click enter. I'm going to save it using the same file name as a DWG file. I usually do this, and I collect all these files also usually in an Exchange folder or some place where a repository, a folder or whatever, where Exchange files can exist. So the workflow here now is that if I update the geometry in Revit, say for instance we go into the Revit file and we add a door. No door family is loaded. A window. No window. Well, at least we can make a wall. I'm making 2 new walls. I'm exporting this, overwriting the previous DWG file. Now, obviously, our Rhino file hasn't updated. So, inside the Rhino file, I'm going to Control A, just select everything, deleting the geometry, and then going back to the DWG file and then importing it, not opening it, importing it. Whatever layer settings or system settings that you set up in this Rhino file is then going to be kept. This is important, for instance, when it comes to glass, or if you're working with rendering in Rhino, that you keep the settings in your file, not open a new file, but import the geometry into your existing file. And then you can see also this undesirable behavior that the walls come in as red because the color of the elements are not set to be by a layer. Alright, Now save this file, and how I use these files and how I work with the system is that when I'm going to start designing something in Rhino, I usually create a new Rhino file with Control N or going File, New, using the large object meters template, the same as we did before. Maybe we want to purge these default layers. And then I drag the Rhino file. You can actually do this with the DWG file also. You drag the Rhino file and create an attachment in Rhino. Alright, what did I just do? I created a reference to the Rhino file that's the container of my Revit geometry via the DWG file. The reason I want to do this is that now I can turn on and off the entire Revit export. And I can proceed by modeling in Rhino and just keeping the layer structure in my Rhino file clean and nice and short, and just keeping all the subcategories of my Revit import under the main layer of the attached Rhino file. I hope this made sense. In the next section, we're going to look at how we model things in Rhino and bring them into Revit. We're also going to look at how to specify layers in a more specified way so that you can use Revit geometry in Rhino for rendering, for instance. Okay, thank you.